as a contribution, and when this contribution became a bit fossilized, what happened to the world? For that, as you will see, brother, this is not moving.
Or maybe
I'll download it from here. Okay. Thank you. I will not go in historical resume. I don't like to go on historical facts at all, although I'm trained as a historian. I'll just touch on these few points and leave it to your imagination to fill those gaps and then raise questions when we have time for it. We know very well the condition of world civilizations when Islam came was horrible. They talk about Rome, Persia, India, Arabia, all of them were suffering from ethical and moral decline, political disintegration, social crisis, at the same time cultural decay. All this is known to us throughout the books of history. What was done by Islam was essentially a paradigm shift, which I call culture of revealed knowledge. This revealed knowledge was given to humanity as ultimate knowledge and ultimate truth, al-haq. This ultimate knowledge provided them what is nature of reality, what is nature of humanity, what's nature of universe. All three aspects together. Should we feel a tiny, insignificant person in universe, or we feel the whole universe has been made subservient for us? Taskhir of this scorn for human beings, which means you have no more to fight to conquer universe, which has been the basic assumption of empirical science. Similarly, it meant that your lifestyle is to be modeled with a new dimension. You don't decide for yourself with a very finite mind and the so claimed unlimited memory of your computers. With all those claims, the mega computers cannot be compared with a small part of human mind. A small part of human mind can store more knowledge, retrieve it and translate it and interpret it, while computerized knowledge can never interpret, can only give you feedback. Feed in and feedback, nothing more than that. Therefore, this revealed knowledge provided a new vision of life, new vision of universe, new vision of humanity. And that became the beginning of a new culture and civilization. It was not an evolution of Arabian culture into Islamic culture. It was not a matter of Arabian dress to become Islamic dress. Not a matter of Arabian food to become Islamic food. Not a matter of Arabian language to become Islamic language. Allah sent messages in Syriac, in Hebrew. He is not confined by Arabic. Therefore, it was essentially an Islamization of Arabic language, Islamization of customs and traditions, and only those customs and traditions were allowed to survive which were according to Islamic values. It's values which came from divine revelation that gave birth to a culture and civilization. The whole cycle of birth of civilization is different. It's not based on the so-called Western or Eastern understanding of evolution of culture and civilization. Secondly, it was production and dissemination of knowledge. Therefore, the Quran made it obligatory that you must be a people who know, who understand, who analyze ilm, ma'rifah, tafaqquh, tadabbur, tafheem, ta'allum, not one but so many terms used again and again on every single page of the Quran. I'm not a people, a qawm who uses aql, a qawm who uses fahm, a qawm who uses tadabbur, and so on and so forth. Therefore, a culture of creating knowledge and disseminating. When Muslims became consumers of knowledge, then they had what our brother bin Nabi has said, chronicability, that you feel proud in using jargons of the West to show you are intellectual. If you find somewhere someone saying there is a renaissance, you start saying we need a renaissance in Islam, never knowing what the meaning of renaissance, of what. For Europe, it was re-emergence of the Greek thought. For Islam, it can never be like that. For Islam, you have the Quran and Sunnah shining. You don't have to go back to pre-Islamic Arabia for Renaissance. Therefore, when we are intellectually, socially, culturally enslaved, that's what bin Nabi calls chronicability. Islam wanted production of knowledge, not consumption. We have to change our attitude, not to consume but to produce. When we produce, our products capture the market. Now we are consumers. Ideas, theories, concepts produced by others are taken by Muslims, leaders or non-leaders makes no difference. They use same language and jargon and feel elated as if they are enlightened. One single word, globalization, and you find there is no Muslim ruler who will never use this word with pride, as if something has been discovered by him. They never know what's the meaning. Third, emphasis on research, investigation, and critical thinking. When you find Sayyidina Ibrahim and others raising critical questions, can we afford that kind of questions in a seminary in a Muslim society today? Can a student of a Shaykhul Hadith raise those questions in the class which he raised to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? Critical thinking. How you do it? Why you do it? Show me. Now without that critical thinking, we cannot be leaders. Leadership means when you have that approach and you are the leaders. Don't wait for someone to come. You are the leaders, because you have been able to acquire what is current knowledge, and you have joined here your brothers and sisters to understand what is your turas, what's your heritage. Your turas is not Arabic turas, but Islamic turas. Islamic turas means Islamic values in the Quran and Sunnah, which are universal, which are not confined to one region, one nation, or one time. Therefore, the paradigm shift which was brought focuses around these three important aspects. Muslim computer science and technology is known to us, and Brother Mohsen has made it easy for me this morning by referring to what was done in Spain and elsewhere. The same was done in other parts of the world by Muslims. They led humanity in scientific development, in technology, in coming up with improvisation which cannot be even understood today. If you just try to find out about the waterway system made in Spain by Muslims, how they brought water from sources, how they were able to create a system of water pressure on one and same level, where the water rises to a certain level in one point and not in that point. Some of the very primitive things they did are taken as highly cultured aspects discovered by the West after centuries. Muslim shower which you have today is not what Europe has discovered today. This is essentially a Muslim device used in Spain by Muslims and neglected by the Europeans. They neglected for centuries till they discover again after trial and error. This is the most hygienic, scientific way of living a better life. Not one, but hundreds of examples can be given. Therefore, I don't think about that. I have just touched on these aspects where Muslims made their contribution. But what was the problem? The word degeneration used in the original title is modified here by me. I believe that decline of Muslim political power had essentially these 5 factors. First, dilution of faith. They started following the path of other nations for whom religion was ritual. Religion was a matter of certain ceremonies. Religion was a matter of a Shaykhul Islam. He should do Islam for us and we enjoy our life. Therefore, dilution of faith. Islam wanted every single believer to be a knowledgeable Muslim. A Muslim who knows how to differentiate between halal and haram in chemistry, in physics, in engineering. What kind of space engineering is human friendly, therefore halal? What kind of space engineering is human enemy, therefore haram? What kind of medicine is going to uplift humanity, therefore halal? What kind of laser surgery will create a problem for humanity, therefore haram? Genetic engineering can be approached from these 2 perspectives. One, what someone calls playing gods. The other, what is serving humanity. But how to decide about it? Should I decide? No. Islamic principles of halal and haram, of maslihah amma, of what is tarjih, what is priority, all those principles given by the Quran and Sunnah and developed by the fuqaha are to be taken into consideration. Only then you can decide about it. Therefore, when we have dilution of faith, then we have no more progress and development which is cohesive, which is integrated, but we have a diversified development. Secondly, internal divisions, and you heard a lot about it. Even today, if Muslims are divided in terms of their fiqhi masalik, and even in one and same fiqhi maslak in terms of mosques and centers, who don't have their hearts and minds wide enough to accept differences, then we cannot play our role. Thirdly, adoption of Greek thought. Adaptation and adoption, two separate things. Islam is for adaptation, not for adoption. Islam allows a believer to adapt things which are suitable and in Islamic framework, but does not allow to adopt things. Adoption means when you have the whole system taken. Adaptation means you use critical mind to find out where we have some conflict, where things are in line. Therefore, when we adopted, and for that matter, if we adopt Western democracy, if we adopt Western culture, if we adopt Western food, if we adopt Western architecture, in all cases we are losers. I have seen with my own eyes in many Muslim countries, architects who are trained in France, Germany, America and elsewhere, when they go back to their own home countries, without knowing the climatic conditions, they replicate the kind of homes, the kind of buildings which they learn to make in their Western experience. They have no idea about airflow, no idea about heat, no idea about insulation difficulties. Just replicate, because their mindset has changed. That's adoption. But if they use technology, if they learn methods, but have adaptation, changes. Muslim culture adapted a number of things, but everything was transformed. We used red stone, we used white marble, we used sandstones as main substance, even some pillars of earlier people. But all those were transformed into a new structure. If you visit Jami Qurtuba or Jami Ummi or many others, you can see with your own eyes how local substance was used with one single concept of one single civilization globally. You travel from one place to the other end of the world, whether in Central Asia, whether in Spain, whether in Middle East, elsewhere, and you will have one and same civilization, same culture, same concepts, although substance will be changed. This is the power and beauty of Islamic culture, because of value-based system. Value is one and same, and that value reflects itself in all those manifestations. Next, dualism in life. That life was divided in two sections, a sacred and a secular realm. When they want to go to masjid, they would like to put a specific kind of dress, a prayer hat, make wudu, on Friday make ghusl. But when they go to a workplace, they'll never worry about does their body smell or not. This is division of secularity and sacredness. When they go to masjid, they say, Allah, you are A'la, Azim, Akbar. When they are back in factory, they say, Uncle Sam, you are great. Your system is better. Dollar, you are great. Money is God. Glamour, you are better. Glamour is my God. So if I am popular, people like me, then I am a great person. All these gods come back when they leave the masjid. This is duality. When they go in their home, then whatever is demand of their family becomes halal for them, while same was haram when they were in masjid. This dualism has been one reason for that problem. And lastly, ethnic and nationalistic trends, that we are Yemenis, we are Arabs, we are Indonesians, we are Pakistanis. All these ethnic and nationalistic trends. Iqbal, in one of his very famous couplet, says, among the modern gods, the biggest is Watan. Then he says, whatever is the dress of this god of Watan is the coffin of the Muslim Ummah. And we worship that Watan. We worship that ethnicity. We worship that blood relationship, that linguistic approach which was condemned by Islam completely. These are just a few of those aspects. Now, having said that, I see a very obvious Islamic revivalism in the 20th century, and that is reflected first and foremost in the holistic view of Islam as the way of life, not as religion. Secondly, as Islam understood as deen and not as religion. Third, Islam having its applied dimension of Tawheed, not just a matter of Aqidah. I discussed this yesterday in a bit detailed manner, but it needs much more detail for which we don't have time. And I see that role of Muslim reformers, revivalists in this age has made Islam much more vibrant reality. Then the question arises, is there a place for religious fundamentalism in Islam? When we say Islam's revival, does it mean that Muslims, when they go back to the Quran and Sunnah, can be called fundamentalists? The topic requires extraordinary careful study. The terminology, its meaning, implication, history need to be explored. I am not aware of a single Muslim scholar who calls himself or defines Islam as person who is asasi, as person who is concerned about